pronounce. That just ruined it. Dr. Schultz? Thank you. What she said. And she is a professor at Muskingum and principal bassoonist with the Southeastern Ohio Symphony Orchestra. And we have Leanne Bader, who does many things, one of which is manager at the Southeastern Ohio Symphony Orchestra. Following the program, we're going to tell you about some really exciting developments and partnerships between your Muskingum County Library System and the Symphony Orchestra. So lots of good news, a good lunch, and a great program. Please welcome our guests.
Thank you. Very, very pleased to see so many folks here, and we're going to do a lot of music playing and hopefully a little bit of learning. I kind of thought about the fact that probably people don't know a whole lot about the violin. So I thought we would play some different music, talk about it a bit. If you have questions later on, and if you have a burning question in that moment, it's okay, I don't mind. You're welcome to ask questions as we go, and Dr. Allison Dani, I'm sure, would be willing to answer questions about the piano as well, or whatever musical things that you would like to ask. I'm sure she'll be fine with that as well. So, the violin itself, before I get into playing, we'll kind of play a nice diversity for you this afternoon. The violin itself is an instrument that's been around, this one not quite that long, but the instrument itself started being made in the 1500s. So the longevity of that is fantastic. And the truth is, certain makers making in the 15 and 1600s, we still to this day cannot emulate exactly what they did. With all of the technology we have opportunities to analyze the wood. We have opportunities of all the technology, the cutting. It's still done by hand. There's a lot of machine created instruments now. They're less expensive. Students have the ability to get instruments because the strings are also the most expensive of all of the instruments. So when grandchildren and children want to play instruments, people tend, oh, if you know this, you go, oh, don't play strings, because we don't want to have to spend too much. But they are making more and more stringed instruments that are decent quality of a student level that are machine made. But the finest instruments, of course, have always been made by hand and began to be made in the 1500s. Prior to that time, we had slightly different instruments called the viola da gamba, which coexisted with the violin family. But the viola da gamba, if you've seen a guitar, you see frets, right? You see the frets across. These instruments do not have the frets. The viola da gamba did, and consequently, it was also played with gut strings. Everybody says, uh-oh, cat gut. Now, I have 2 cats, and I know they would be highly offended if they were to think that that was the case. And it's not the case. It was actually sheep gut, and it does continue to be. If you have true gut strings on your instrument, it's actually sheep gut. And the sheep was used for a reason. It wasn't just arbitrarily, we're going to go make violin strings. It was actually a byproduct that then we were able to use that byproduct and not waste parts and pieces of animals that were needing to be utilized for other things. So sheep gut is in fact what is used, and yes, today you can still buy gut strings. The string on the instrument, if you have gut strings, which I actually have synthetic, although I have used gut strings, but this particular, it depends on the instrument, what it likes, what sound you like. A gut string is going to have a warmer sound to it, although they are creating synthetic gut. It's equivalent to, if you look at fishing line, it kind of looks like that. It's not quite the same, but it's very similar to that. It's very much like fishing line. It's called purlon. And what they do then is they wrap that purlon in what you can see, some form of metal. In my case, I prefer there's silver wrapping for the lowest string, which is a G. I have silver wrapping on the D. It's more comfortable and feels better underneath my fingers. It's aluminum wrapping on the A string, and actually my E string, you might notice, the highest, the thinnest, smallest string is actually gold. And it is truly gold. It's not a whole lot of gold, so it's not particularly expensive per se, although strings are not cheap anymore. But it is made of gold, and that too gives it a warmer sound. The top string on the violin is an E, the note E, and it sounds in that spot. That's what the E sounds like as an open string, meaning no fingers down. So the E string on many instruments can be a little bit tinny, can be a little bit high-strung, if you will. I just made that one up, but it's a little high-strung per se. And I'm not very fond of a very bright, screamy sounding E string, so I prefer to use a gold string that tones it down. It still gets high up in the register. But when I play up in that register, it gives me a warmer, more pleasant sound when I use a gold string versus steel or a wrapped string. Generally the E isn't even wrapped because it's so thin. And again, if you look at the instrument itself and you look at the strings as best you can, the thinnest goes to thicker to thicker to thickest. And the way that the violin gets its sound is based on, everything gets their sound. That was one there. Okay, here, I'll just set it down here. Oh, thanks. Thank you. The instrument creates its sound. All sound is vibration. And so in order to make sound, to make music, we utilize vibration. The vibration here, if I pull this string, you can kind of see it vibrate. Probably not well. If I had a bigger instrument, you would see it better. But you can still see the string wiggling. That's the vibration. That's how we produce our sound, is through vibration. The piano vibrates as well, but you simply don't see it. It's plucked. There's a string inside that plucks, and you have that same vibration that takes place, or rather not plucked, but hammered, but takes place this in the same manner. If you were playing a wind instrument, it's the column of air that blows through, creates the vibration, creates the music, creates the sound. So we all have to have vibration of some way. On the string instrument, we have different parts and pieces. When I pull the bow across the string, this is the bow, when I pull it across the string and create that vibration, what actually happens is the sound kind of goes inside the instrument, creates a nice vibration, and sends it out. These two holes, these are the sound holes, and if you look closely, they look like old-fashioned cursive Fs, the letter F. So they're actually, we reference them in violin, cello, viola. It's called an F hole simply because it looks like a cursive F. But that's like your speaker. If you have a stereo system or in your car, that's your speaker. That's our sound production speaker for the instrument. Back in the Baroque time period, let me play a little bit of music for you. When the heyday of the instrument took place, when I say the 1600s, this was a heyday for this instrument to be created. When this violin, cello, viola, when these instruments were being created, it was very exciting because without frets, you could do so much more. And people learned to play the instrument so much better that composers said, wow, this is awesome. I can write more exciting music, more interesting music, more musical music, if you will. So what I'm going to play for you now is actually a very lyric type of a selection. It's not a fast one. I promise there will be fast. But this one is lyrical from the Baroque time period, and that was the 1600s. This particular piece was composed by probably somebody you've heard of, Johann Sebastian Bach. He wrote many, many chorales. You've heard of chorales if you hear the organ in church lots of times. And Bach in the 1600s was an organist and a composer. And as an organist, he was really, really well known because he could improvise at the keyboard. In other words, improvise means to make it up. Which, by the way, if you're a fan of jazz, the whole concept of improvisation actually comes from the Baroque time period. It's not something we thought of in the 20th century. It comes all the way back from the Baroque time period, where a lot of improvisation was also taking place. So jazz music has improvisation, Baroque music has a lot of improvisation. And so Johann Sebastian Bach was very well known as an improviser at the organ, and he played for church services. He also wrote music for church services, but he himself, during his life, was known for that and was not as recommended as a composer. People did not find his music because it was a little bit challenging to listen to. This particular piece is not. But it was a little bit on a different level, and people thought, well, there's just an awful lot going on in that music, so it's kind of hard to listen to. Now, Bach, at the time, if you think about what composers had to do, nowadays, often a composer is a theory teacher or a composition teacher at a university, because composition does not pay a whole lot of money. It's not a big money skill. It's a big money skill, but it's not a big money maker if you're a composer. So many composers turn as well to teaching composition or music theory, because that would be their forte. At the time, A composer, such as Johann Sebastian Bach, was also a church musician. And as a church musician, he was having to write music for every Sunday. Special music for a feast day. Rehearse the orchestra. Rehearse with whomever needed to play or sing. So the job of the music director at that time was hugely intense, in addition to composing all this music. So go figure, he had 21 children. Not sure how he had time for all of that, but he was truly an amazing composer for this time period. So what we're going to play for you now is a very beautiful, simple air for the instrument. Lots of different instruments play this air. It's simply called an air. It's just a lovely piece of music that you might have heard prior to a church service back in Bach's time in the 1600s. differently. We were able to, because Dr. Alessandrini is playing the piano, at that time you might have played something like that with a harpsichord. And a harpsichord has plucked strings, and in the case of a harpsichord, no matter how hard you hit it, not that you want to pound on a harpsichord, but you hit it softly, you hit it hard, it's going to have the same volume. There was loud, there was soft, and even with a harpsichord, loud isn't really loud when we talk about loud. It never got very loud. So you had two stops, bit louder and not so loud. That was what you had. With a piano, Dr. Alessandrini can actually change the dynamic, meaning the volume, as we go. And depending if you could maybe even demonstrate softer to louder as you play on the piano.
No.
So as you can hear, the change in volume, and in musical terms we call that dynamic, as you can hear, the piano can do that, whereas the harpsichord could not So generally during the Baroque time periods, we took a little bit more contemporary artistic license. It would be kind of loud or soft, and you didn't have a whole lot in between, which with the more modern piano, we can in fact put some more things in between. So at the time of the Baroque, this stick here that we call the bow really looked quite different. It had more tension and it was arched. So it was a very different bow. This right here is what we reference as modern, and this became modern in the 1700s. It seems weird to say, yeah, this is a modern violin, and that's 1700s is when we became modern. But, you know, I always make a joke about it. If it ain't Baroque, don't fix it. But it's true. In the Baroque time period, actually, this instrument, this is not that old, but if it were to come from the 1600s, it would have a new neck on it. This part is the scroll, the peg box, where the pegs, we use them to tune, tighten, and loosen the strings. And this neck, at that time, was a good bit shorter. And so in the 1700s, a lot of instruments, they took the neck off and put on a longer neck so that you could have more notes. We could get lower, we could get higher. The smaller the instrument, the higher it goes. The piano is a wonderful instrument because it covers the entire gamut. You've got the right side of the keyboard, which is very high.